Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Damian Sassower. Coming up on the show, we talk some football. We hear from Jeff Benedict. He's an Emmy award-winning writer and a New York Times best-selling author whose latest book, The Dynasty, is considered the definitive account of the Patriots during the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft era that yielded Super Bowl after Super Bowl.
He's in! Patriots win the Super Bowl! Brady has his fifth! What a comeback!
We'll also check in on the private jet space and learn about the business of air travel for pro teams. All of that is straight ahead on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. But first, the NBA. Despite adding in things like the NBA Cup, it's looking like the TV ratings are much lower than last year. And Bloomberg Opinion columnist Tyler Cowen believes the issue comes down to economics. He's also a professor of economics at George Mason University. Tyler's here now to talk with us. It is a great piece, Professor, that you have written an opinion that the NBA's problem is economics, not basketball. What happened? What the game is supposed to be the perfect game because it's a 2.5-hour window and it helps everybody with their attention span. But what happened?
I'm an NBA fan, and I'm worried that other people are starting to lose interest. So TV ratings are down. Recently, the NBA Cup was held. It seemed the world didn't care that much. I think what people are really missing from the NBA are just megastars and mega teams that keep on winning. The next Michael Jordan, the next younger LeBron James. That's what really draws interest to the sport.
That's what draws interest to the sport, and it's not as if there aren't any superstars in the making. I know LeBron James is, towards the end of his career as opposed to the beginning, but he has a son, and there was a lot of excitement over father and son playing on the same team. And the NBA, more than any other sport, is known for minting superstars. You can see their face. There aren't that many of them on the court, as opposed to a game like hockey, for instance, where there are helmets covering their faces, and it's very much a team sport. What is it about the economics of the NBA that is preventing superstars from really being able to, be their best superstar selves?
Well, the last 6 years, we've had 6 different teams win NBA titles. So there's not been a dominant team. In the 1980s, it was the Celtics and the Lakers. In the 1990s, it was Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. For a while earlier, it was the Golden State Warriors. But we have this thing in basketball called the salary cap. It's very complicated. They've made it tighter. But basically, it's very hard for top teams to keep spending money to keep their old stars or to bring in new ones. So there's a kind of parity sets in where every year there's a different winner and fans generate less interest. If you look at chess, Magnus Carlsen, an incredible performer, he drove interest in the game. In tennis, it was Roger Federer, who just got everyone involved. So fans don't actually want pure competitive balance.
Professor, one of the things you had written in your opinion piece is that the smaller market teams, like maybe a Milwaukee or in Oklahoma, they may have a dedicated fan base, but they're having a tough time trying to hang with broadcast rights and such.
Well, if the problem is if you're now the Los Angeles Lakers or the New York Knicks or the Los Angeles Clippers or Chicago, you're in a big market. But there's this thing in the salary cap. It's called the second apron. And it just makes it prohibitively expensive to use, your market size to become better. I think fans would actually enjoy it more if there were 2 or 3 dominant teams with regular face-offs. And right now, well, you have Toronto win for a year, you have Denver win for a year, you have the Boston Celtics win for a year. And it's frustrating because none of the players on those teams can achieve the iconic status of, say, a Michael Jordan, who won 6 NBA titles across a span of 6 years.
And became a franchise player in a way that maybe we're not going to see in the meantime. But let me go back to that idea of parity. I thought every league wanted parity. When you have a league that's dominated by one team too much, other teams' fans tend to lose interest because it's kind of like you're swimming against the tide. It's almost impossible. Teams are always talking up how they want to create more parity so that each city's team has a chance. Is there such a thing as too much parity?
There is such a thing as too much parity. Keep in mind the NBA, like many sports, is increasingly becoming a national and also international market. So do the people in Milan, Italy, care if the San Antonio Spurs are competitive this year? Probably not. There's so much competition for people's attention. What you need to do is to attract their viewing to the sport at all. Like I live outside of Washington, D.C. I don't care that much if the Wizards are a good team. In fact, they're a terrible team. But if the sport is interesting, I'll follow games on TV. That brings in a more lucrative TV contract, ad revenue, pays for the whole sport. So the city-by-city analysis, it just matters much less than it used to.
And you are right, because just a quick comparison to the NFL, the NFC North is extremely competitive. You've got 3 out of the 4 teams, and you don't know where it's going to go by the time the regular season is over. But in the NBA, it seems that's not the case.
Yes, what the NFL has done is made the Super Bowl the single most important national event. In some ways, it gets more attention than the day of our presidential election. And people don't sit back and say, oh, is my team in the Super Bowl? No, they want to watch it, right? It's this universal event. You want to talk about the ads, have snacks with your friends, have a party over your house. The NBA Finals are nothing like that. And I think that's the problem. Again, the more intense the competition for attention, the bigger your biggest star needs to be. For the NFL, it's not an individual because there's a helmet on, but it's like the ultimate game itself, the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Also, there's limited supply, right? There's a limited number of teams. There's a limited number of games played per season as well. I want to ask you, Tyler, as the NBA thinks about expanding beyond its current 30-team lineup, from an economist's point of view, how should they proceed?
Well, I think Las Vegas, for instance, and also Seattle could easily support profitable NBA teams. I think they should do it. But it doesn't solve the basic problem for the sport, which is in the long run, there's cable cutting. Younger viewers for almost everything, they just have different tastes. And the question is, why should they follow the same sport that maybe their father and grandfather did? And right now, the NBA does not have a great answer to that question. There are some other issues in the sport. So many people say there's too many three-point shots. It's boring. I agree with that. I'm not sure it's the main problem, but it's an issue. Another issue is so many of the top stars now are foreigners. Maybe Americans relate less well to those individuals than they would, say, to Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Larry Bird. That's another possible problem, but it's not one we really can fix.
It's an interesting problem because out of the 4 major sports food groups, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, the NBA is the only one where they have a competitive WNBA. And you would think that it would draw interest to the game itself, but they're struggling with the finances for the NBA.
One thing the NBA has done very well is figure out how to use the internet and how to use Twitter to popularize the sport. And the NBA makes sense in short clips in a way that, say, baseball does not, maybe hockey does not. So that's a built-in advantage they had. Say 10 years ago, they were very much using that to their benefit. But the gains from that have plateaued, and they're looking for the next big marketing innovation.
What do you think of the NBA Cup as a marketing innovation? I kind of didn't understand it when they first announced it. And, just doing some preliminary Googling on it, I've learned that it's the Emirates NBA Cup. So it it feels like this was created because there was a sponsor that wanted to sponsor something like this.
I think very few people care. No one understands the rules. I don't understand the rules. I didn't really follow it. I didn't feel I lost anything from not following it. It doesn't have any predictive value. I'm fine with the Emirates paying for some of it, but that's a sign no domestic sponsor is really that involved, right? Mm-hmm. So ultimately, the whole thing is a symptom of not having this major climactic event. And if anything, it seems to make the NBA Finals slightly less focal, slightly less iconic, slightly less important.
I'm a big fan of NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. What does he need to do to help fix this problem?
I don't know that they can fix it. I do think they should entertain rules changes to limit the number of fouls, limit the number of three-pointers, and just have some new clever marketing idea and treat the NBA Finals as something grand. One thing tennis has done well, there's just a large number of decisive points in any tennis match. Well, there's a game, there's a set, there's a match, right? So there's a lot at stake on many different plays. So if you're watching Federer, well, you feel this is an important moment more than once or twice in the course of a number of sets. And maybe the NBA should restructure its finals and playoffs so that's more the case.
And that would be a normal...
Winning the game, it's like a best out of 5 sets, something like that. More decisive points.
Mm-hmm. And that would be a normal thing for a sport to retool some of how the season works or how the game is played. I think about MLB and the rule changes that it implemented 2 seasons ago, and the games became faster, they became more compelling. How else do you think...
You don't have to learn any new rules for that. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching an NBA game, like halfway through the second quarter, I'm thinking like none of this matters. Can I just fast forward to the last 5 minutes of the game? I think many people feel that way.
I've long thought that way, but I'm a hockey fan, so I was always kind of a little bit put off by the NBA because they soak up so much more attention during the winter than the hockey games do. Tyler, when you watch a game, how do you take yourself as the economist out of the picture? How do you just watch it as a fan as opposed to as an economist?
Well, I don't. I always watch it as an economist. I'm thinking, how well do the numbers measure value here? What's this player worth? How is the salary cap influencing what I see on the court? But I think that's fine. If that's what keeps me interested, great.
Tyler Cowen, seeking excellence in the NBA. Thank you so much. Tyler Cowen is a Bloomberg Opinion columnist, professor of economics, if you couldn't tell, at George Mason University.
Up next on the show, we turn to the business of air travel for pro teams. For my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Damian Sassower, I'm Michael Barr. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with my colleagues Scarlet Fu and Damian Sassower. Elevate Aviation Group helps to get your athletes and favorite teams where they need to be. It's an aviation company with a diverse fleet of private aircraft that serves numerous teams, players, and leagues. Elevate CEO Greg Raiff took time recently to talk with Scarlet, Damian, and guest host Bloomberg Originals sports correspondent Vanessa Perdomo. Let's take a listen to some of that conversation on the business of air travel for athletes.
So this is a company that's been around for decades. Give us a sense of what you do for the professional sports leagues. Do you work with leagues or do you work with teams? And do you provide all their travel needs?
The answer to that is yes to both. Everyone's got either a Sam Walton or a Steve Jobs quote, and mine was the Sam Walton adage of every great idea I have, I stole from somebody else. Way back, maybe almost 30 years ago now, what was Northwest Airlines, now part of Delta, started a program with David Stern for the NBA. And it was a league-based program because Commissioner Stern was sick and tired of teams showing up late for games and showing up late to away cities. And so he built, using the pressure and the leverage of all those television revenues and the fantastic meteoric rise of the NBA back then, sort of pulled all the teams in, took almost 10 years. We copied that with some of the other sports leagues and then built it off into working directly with clubs. Ultimately, if you think about any sports league, It's really the not-for-profit operating arm of each individual owners, right? Folks in league offices like to tell me that they work for the team owner. So ultimately, it's a little bit of herding cats. You've got to get the teams to be willing to sign up, but it's great to have the relationship with the league offices directly who can influence decisions and frankly deliver purchasing power by aggregating that spend.
So, Greg, you have to help me out here because, I remember the good old days when Kenny Dichter came rolling around with NetJets and Marquis Jet. And now, I get LinkedIn notes. I get emails all the time about, Damian, we want you. I mean, like, how many private charters are really out there? And, what differentiates you? Like, why would teams and athletes choose Elevate?
So as a disclaimer, I think of Kenny as a dear friend, and I remember when he was first running Marquis Jet, and he used to count the number of windows on the airplane to tell you whether it was a big jet or a small jet. I got started doing this 35 years ago. The first airplane I ever chartered was a Boeing 747, and the company I started out of my dorm room that became MTV Spring Break before we sold it in the late 90s. And so I always sort of thought about airplanes as being Boeings and Airbuses and big, huge monster airplanes. In fact, our company didn't actually charter our first executive jet until 2005 when one of the drummers for one of the bands that we were supporting needed to go see his chiropractor in Vail and turned to one of the flight attendants and said, "Hey, can you get me a Learjet?" And we sort of all scratched our heads and said, "What's a Learjet?" Most of the providers, and there are thousands and thousands of providers in the executive jet space, right? And it's a little disappointing because all it takes is a Gmail address and a cell phone to say that you're in the charter business. What we do is very different. I sort of think of Elevate Aviation Group as the FedEx of moving people instead of boxes. We focus on the deepest end of the transportation market, moving presidential campaigns, working with both of them in the last cycle. Obviously, the professional sports teams, CEOs of the largest companies in the United States, working with the U.S. government and other groups where what they all share in common is they are using air transportation to commute to work. It's not about champagne. It's not about caviar. It's about taking athletes and taking other professionals to a place, to a meeting, to a game, to a concert, to a speech, and having them arrive rested, stress-free,
right,
re-energized, refueled, right? And doing that requires a level of expertise, logistics, and hands-on knowledge that far exceeds what you might get in one of these traditional bookthecheapestjet.com app that you can find so easily on the internet.
It's funny that you were saying about how it's not about them drinking champagne and things like that, but I have a hard time believing that they don't have a little bubbly when they first board the plane. But one of the things
I was just going to admit that whenever one of our pro teams wins a championship, there's a lot of champagne.
Among other things, I'm sure.
So a few years ago, you were talking about how it's really about getting, people to places without stress and things like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about how different it is and how much of an advantage it is for teams and leagues to fly, charter? A few years ago, the New York Liberty owners got in trouble for flying their team charter because it was an advantage they had over other teams. So can you explain to us exactly what those advantages are?
Absolutely. So the way I like to think of it is that a typical professional team in a winter sport, right, with all the games. So think professional hockey, professional basketball. They might have 75 or even 80 flights in the course of a season. And we like to think of our job as being responsible for trying to shave off 12 minutes on every flight. And anyone who's ever taken a commercial flight and had the captain say, "We're just waiting a second to finish some paperwork. We're going to need a few more moments to get the bags together. We're waiting for our jetway. We're waiting for the belt load," or whatever it might be. Those minutes add up. Professional athletes are, we all know, sort of the 1% of the 1% of the highest performing humans on the planet from a physical perspective, right? Whatever sport they've chosen. And they're all pretty close, right? The difference between winning a championship and not even making the playoffs might be 3 or 4 games. It might be, a basket here or one goal in that game. And so if we can save our teams 10 minutes of flight on every flight between the time that they roll in on the buses and they're on the buses at the arrival city moving out. 10 minutes times 75 flights is 750 minutes. Well, that's, I got to do the math. I think it's 12 and a half hours of rest, right? So think about what happens to a professional athlete, how much better they can perform when they have over the course of a season, 12 and a half extra hours, whether it's to watch film, sleep, be in PT, be in the workout room, the strength room, grabbing a meal, whatever it might be. It makes a difference. And I think it's huge. I remember when, Major League Soccer has been on an absolute tear, and soccer, or football as people outside of the U.S. call it, has been on this meteoric rise in the United States, right? And that league has been incredible, and they've done amazing work. And when I think about the fact that before COVID, those teams were all flying commercial, and now they're all flying privately everywhere they go. And WNBA has now stepped up, right? Yep. And they're all flying privately. It's a huge investment. Moving a team around is maybe the largest spend that a team will pay for in the course of a season, beyond obviously payroll and the stadium and practice facilities themselves. And travel is a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. So that investment pays off for teams that are willing to invest in it. And it's wonderful to see every once in a while, you'll see a new owner buy a franchise and decide to buy an airplane. It's a huge 8-figure investment that they make. And Mark Cuban was famous for buying a 757 when he bought the Mavericks. And to their credit, I understand that the new ownership, the Adelson family out of Las Vegas, is keeping the airplane despite the fact that they turned over the ownership.
Right. That makes sense, especially this idea of maximizing efficiency, minimizing the disruption of cross-country travel on these elite athletes. I'm curious what the single biggest challenge of transporting professional sports teams is that you only discovered once you were doing it versus when it was part of your pitch.
Boy, I've been doing this for so long. It's kind of hard to remember that far back. But I will admit that I did not realize just how cold it gets in places like Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg in the middle of the winter. I mean, if they could start playing professional hockey in the summer instead of in the winter, that would be great as far as I'm concerned. But, I think it's really as sports science and as technology has grown, we all take it for granted at home or even on this call together. But, Wi-Fi is just so important. And having people stay connected because it allows them to be productive on the plane. We have tables, conference tables set up on the airplanes that coaches and general managers will use to negotiate trades, look at roster assignments, watch game film, do the business work of flying. The other piece, I guess, in the sports science part is I'm stunned at exactly how many calories a professional athlete has to consume every day just to keep their weight up and therefore keep their strength up.
Including on the travel trips too, right? I mean, while they're in flight.
And frankly, it can't be junk food, right? I mean, I guess it can be. There's one player in particular where we have to put a king size Snickers bar on the seat before every flight, and sure enough, on.
DK Metcalf.
I didn't hear that, but but so giving people, no one thinks that airline food is fantastic, right? There's certainly great food you can get, an Emirates first class versus the peanuts you might get on Southwest, but making certain that these athletes are fueled and that particularly right after a game when they burn through all those calories is so important, right? Because if you don't replace the calories, it's going to burn off all that muscle mass, and so. In a lot of these teams, we see players end a season 4 or 5 pounds lighter than they began the season. And trust me, these people don't need to lose weight. They don't want to lose weight. It's just a function of just how hard it is to keep up with that regimen.
Greg, I'd like to ask you about your margins. And what I mean by that is this, the running your business today, do you want to be a fleet owner? Do you want to be a fleet renter? I mean, are you really just navigating a network of runways and control towers across the country? I mean, do you want to even, go into all the stuff with dealing with pilots and service staff, as you rightly mentioned, and making sure that food is on airplanes? After all that adds up, does jet fuel even matter to your business anymore? I mean, seriously, where do your margins really come from?
The great part about having what's effectively a low utilization fleet, right? That a major airline like a Southwest might fly their brand new 737s 350 hours in a month, and we're doing roughly 100 or 125 hours.
Right, half that, yeah.
So the variable cost of fuel is a little less meaningful in our business than it is in theirs.
That's Elevate Aviation Group CEO Greg Raiff speaking with my colleague Scarlet Fu, Damian Sassower, and Bloomberg Originals sports correspondent Vanessa Perdomo about the business of air travel for athletes. Up next, Bill Belichick is heading to UNC. We'll talk about that and his legacy with Jeff Benedict, Emmy Award-winning writer and author of The Dynasty. I'm Michael Barr. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr. Jeff Benedict is an Emmy Award-winning writer and a New York Times best-selling author of 17 books, including The Dynasty, the definitive account of the New England Patriots during their historic run under Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick, and Tom Brady. With Belichick now heading to the college ranks, my colleagues Damian Sassower, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly, and Bloomberg Original sports correspondent Vanessa Perdomo got a chance to speak with Benedict for his thoughts on this next phase of Belichick's career. Let's take a listen to that conversation.
So, Jeff, we have to kick off by asking you about Coach Bill Belichick. I mean, he's going to UNC. Talk to us about what that means for college sports, for NIL, and for some of these players, and how we're going to develop them and get them NFL ready.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually how much Bill's entrance to college football affects any of that. I think college, to be honest, college football is a big, open kind of Wild West environment right now. And I just don't think Bill Belichick going to North Carolina moves the needle much in terms of changing or impacting anything, really. It might be different if he were going to a school like Alabama or Notre Dame or Michigan, but going to North Carolina, the fourth best team in the ACC, I'm just not sure how much that really impacts college football.
Well, tell us what you think, Jeff. My goodness, that's awesome. Seriously, I know they're number 4 in the ACC, but you would think, with all the money, with all the NIL dollars that are flowing around, someone like Bill Belichick, who is used to dealing with men, with pros, who understands, what that means in terms of how to pay players and how to motivate players. Do you think that he might be able to change the course of that for, of UNC, of their football program?
Look, anything's possible, but what you just said to me really is the root of the problem here. This is a man who spent his entire life in the ranks of the NFL. He is the most accomplished football coach in the history of the National Football League. He has never been anywhere near coaching college football. And it's an environment that's completely different than the one he's operated in his whole career. And he's dealing now with what amount to kids. The young men that he would need to recruit to come to North Carolina are legally, by definition, minors. He's going to be recruiting teenagers. Bill doesn't deal with teenagers. He never has. He deals with grown men like Teddy Bruschi and Rodney Harrison and Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, some of the, you could argue, mentally and physically toughest men you'll find in the sport of football. He's now dealing with kids who are going to be looking for the best deals they can get, whose parents are looking for the best deals their child can get, who can move around at will. I just think it's very different than anything he's ever done. So it would be a leap to think that he's going to make a dramatic impact there. I mean, time will tell, but time will also tell how long he's even there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so interesting that you brought that up, and we were talking about obviously how coaching grown men and coaching NFL players is so different than coaching college kids. And I think one of the other things there to think about is the way that their contracts work, right? You coach college players now. They essentially are free agents every year because of the transfer portal, and that obviously works very differently than NFL contracts where you have to be on the team for a certain amount of years and all of that. So how do you think that will affect, and how successfully or unsuccessfully can he bring that system in and juggle all of those different things that the college system has now?
It's a great question, and I don't think anybody can honestly answer it right now and say, oh, here's how that's going to work out, because it's such an unproven with Bill. I mean, I think you have to look at what things are evident. Like, what are the things we know? What we know is that Bill has been an amazing motivator of men throughout his career, even before he was a head coach. When he was with the Giants as a defensive coordinator, he managed to motivate a group of men on that Giants team that, Carl Banks and Lawrence Taylor and all those guys who were really the ones responsible for the Giants winning those Super Bowls under Bill Parcells. So he has a record of that. He also has a proven record of being probably the best schemer in the game of football in terms of designing game schemes. I mean, he out-schemes his opponents. He's been doing that his whole career as well. He has no record of doing some of the most important things that a college coach has to do, which all starts with recruiting. And I don't really know how a guy who's in his 70s, who's going to a place like Tobacco Row, and you want to bring the best athletes coming out of high school to North Carolina, and you've got to outbid Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Texas. I mean, I just think it's a huge ask for him to do that and to actually succeed. I mean, when he's come into coaching jobs like New England, he had a runway of time to get established. His first season, he was 5-11, and that was with the best quarterback in the NFL at the time, Drew Bledsoe. I mean, I just think it's a huge ask to put on him, but no one asked him to do this. He supposedly wanted to do it. So I just think the jury is out, though, in terms of whether he's able to turn North Carolina into a winning football program.
So you hit on something really interesting there, Jeff, which is this whole idea that, this was his choice to go there. And by all accounts, obviously, he exercised his free will to do it. At the same time, there were no NFL, teams that came a calling. You've talked very eloquently over the past few minutes about sort of his gift for talent management. That you wrote an incredible book, The Dynasty, that's all about this magic formula, this cocktail of the crafts, and Belichick and the greatest probably to ever play the game, Tom Brady, going on this historic streak of winning Super Bowls. What was it about that couldn't translate into another job for him in the NFL?
Well, I was always attracted to the New England Patriots dynasty story from the beginning, based on the fact that I saw it as something so much larger than a football story.
Yeah,
it really is. It's an incredible American story. The dynasty, that word dynasty, is really appropriate for what Bill and Tom and Robert and all the bigger cast of characters up there did over the last 25 years. But part of that story is what's embedded in it is the personalities specifically of Tom, Bill, and Robert. Mm-hmm. And I think that what those three were able to achieve together, I've said this before, I don't think we'll ever see another owner, coach, quarterback tandem that will achieve what they did. And as much as I respect Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, I just don't see them doing this for 20 years. It's so hard to stay together. And when you look at this team, the Patriots under Bill when he was a coach. I mean, he did things that were fantastic for New England's success, but they're not great for the next chapter of your life, if there is a next chapter. And I think that Bill probably always thought he would end his career in New England, he would surpass Don Shula, and he would ride off into the sunset. He'll have a bust in the Hall of Fame, and he'll sail his boat around Nantucket. But that changed, and when it changed, it really changed. And the last 4 years that he spent in New England were nothing like the previous 20. And I think when he was suddenly unemployed, and you look around and the fact that, just think about how many job openings there have been just since he left. And we all know how many openings there are going to be in about a month. And it's so obvious that no one wanted to hire him because I don't think there's anything left on Bill's bucket list to do as a head coach than pass Don Shula. And it has always been important to him, as it should be. Like, that's not a criticism when I say that. I think it absolutely is understandably important to him. It would be to anybody. It's like the last thing that he has. And he's not going to get the chance to do it, certainly not in North Carolina.
Well, I guess it helps that Bill is such a sweet, likable guy also. Jeff, seriously, though.
Cuddly.
So cuddly. But, what's interesting about this, Jeff, for me is you think about, there's one person that Bill Belichick is friends with, and that's Nick Saban. And Nick Saban just left the college football ranks because of NIL. And here comes Bill Belichick coming into college football despite what's going on in NIL. Talk to us a little bit about that, the impact of NIL, Jeff. And does perhaps, Coach Belichick see something that we don't? Are we missing something here? Does he see perhaps the ability, his experience in the NFL that's going to draw in players? And is he bringing anyone with him? Is he bringing his son with him to help coach? Is he bringing anyone with him to help recruit? What's it going to look like down there in UNC?
Well, I certainly would never pretend to see what Bill sees. I don't know what Bill sees.
Or is it just about having a job?
To me, it's what it really speaks to more than anything, and I think is a lot more profound than the question of what will happen in North Carolina. What this really speaks of is it's the aftermath of the way Bill was Bill in the NFL for 25 years. And there isn't anybody that has wanted to open the door for him. And I find that mind-boggling because there's teams like the Dallas Cowboys where you would think a guy like Bill could actually take Jerry Jones to the promised land that he's been trying to get back to for 25 plus years. And the phone doesn't ring. It's interesting and I think fascinating. It really says a lot about sort of the way these guys have rolled out of what they built, that dominant force that they built in New England that stomped on everybody, that won so much for so long. And Tom and Bill have both spun out of it, and they've spun out of it very differently.
That's my colleagues, Damian Sassower, Jason Kelly, and Vanessa Perdomo, speaking with Emmy Award-winning and New York Times best-selling author Jeff Benedict. And that does it for this edition of the Bloomberg Business of Sports. I'm Michael Barr. Thank you for joining us. Tune in again next week for the latest on the stories moving big money in the world of sports. You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world. And don't forget to catch our podcast on all your podcast platforms. Stay with us. Today's top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.